Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peace Podcast. So this one is one that I have most recently gone through, and I just want to name that this is very fresh, but also you know that I share the real with you. So I'm hoping that we can get real today. I'm hoping that we can get real deep today, and I'm also hoping that some form of my freedom will allow you to set yourself free from your own bondage. So today's episode is about being free from shame. And in order to really get into depth with you about this one, I have to be real with you about my experience. And so something that has given me deep shame, something that has made me view myself in a way that other people may not even view me, but has potentially led me to see things from a perspective that doesn't even exist. So it's one of those, a story that I'm telling myself is that people are judging me for this thing, and they may not be. I mean, I don't know what that looks like, but I know that I heard this reel the other day, and I really wish that I would have written down, who the two people were inside of the reel, so that I could give them credit. But if I find it, I'll add it in the show notes, the link to it. But they're having this conversation, and the interviewer asks the interviewee about her experience as she's like helping people, and she's in tears, and she names that she doesn't feel qualified to be helping people move through the journey that she's helping them move through because of the shame that she has around her past and who she formerly was, the parts of her story that she judges herself for. And that hit home for me, of course. But then he said something that I was like, oh my gosh, I wrote it down. It was just impactful for me. And so he said, the things that you feel disqualify you are in fact the things that qualify you to be able to help other people. And I know that we know that because we even look in the Bible at stories, Moses had a stutter, etc. Like, we've heard these stories a million times. He's called to speak to nations, but he has a stutter, and it's like, but this thing disqualifies me, and it actually doesn't. But I think about the videos that I record and the bulk of the people that I help. And I tell myself, well, how are you giving people relationship advice when you're not in a successful relationship? How are you giving people advice on parenting when you're falling short in your parenting journey? How are you giving people advice on anything when you are an imperfect person? And so when I heard that video, it was jarring to me because I thought about all of the places that I feel like I'm disqualified. All of the times I look back at my past experience and feel shame around those things, being in abusive relationships, having a family system that has molestation, abuse, alcoholism, addiction, etc. Like, I think about all those things and I'm like, yeah, but you're just this. Like, you're just a product of this. So what makes you qualified to say anything to people? Why would you even think anyone would listen to you on your pod or, in your videos when that's where you were birthed from? But I realized that the true birthing process came from the growth that existed as a result of that. And that growth cannot be experienced by other people if it is encapsulated by shame, which is what a huge part of where my teachings come from has been encapsulated in shame. And that, I believe, is why sometimes I hold back on my messages. Sometimes I don't record the video. Sometimes I say, oh, well, that's going to reveal too much and you can't expose yourself that much. In fact, I had an interesting conversation with my sister, love her, and we were talking about how the two of us are from the same family system. We both have those perfectionism characteristics that we're breaking free from, and we put it out into the world in a very different way. So she puts up her wall. She completely guards herself so that she's not exposed. And I, on the other hand, will point out my flaws before anyone else notices them, to expose them before anybody judges me for them. So it's kind of like, well, if she already knows that it exists and she's naming it, then we won't judge her for it, which are two completely polar opposite ways to deal with that. But the end result is very similar. We don't want to be exposed for that thing. So she hides it from the world and masks herself. And I just present it to the world so that they don't have the power to expose me. But the result is exactly the same. We're not being truly vulnerable because of that. And so when I go back to think about the greatest shame, the thing that probably puts a dagger in my stomach more often than any other thing, is the fact that I have 3 kids by 3 different people and I've never been married. And y'all, if you're judging me right now for that, judge on, because I get it. There is this societal norm that says, well, that girl is a hoe then, right? And like, we're just going to name it and say what it is. And that could potentially be what you think. And that is perfectly fine. If you're judging me and you're listening here just to judge, then, that's your prerogative. And historically, because that is a pain point for me, I probably have judged other people that way. But more often, it's probably if they have more than I do. So they have to have at least 4 in order for me to judge them. Because if it's 3, then I'm going to judge myself. And we don't like to do that, right? Perfectionists do it on a daily basis anyway. But so that's been a huge pain point for me. It's like, how am I going to go into the world and tell people how to find their partner, tell people what not to accept in a relationship, tell people how to parent, when I have found the wrong person, obviously at least 3 times, right? There's been more, but at least 3, where I have been in relationships with the wrong person and stayed in this for the sake of tenacity and longevity. And where the family system that my kids are growing into, they were birthed in and they're being taught in, is actually one that is considered broken and disruptive and unhealthy and toxic. So who am I to tell you guys what you should be doing in those spaces? But the reality is, I'm not telling you what you should be doing. I'm sharing with you what I've experienced, whether it's, here's what I experienced on my journey, so let me help you experience that same thing to pull you to a place of freedom, or whether it's, here's what I did in my journey and I don't want you to have to experience that, so let me share with you what that was like and what the result of that thing was. It qualifies me, right? It qualifies me to be able to share with you because I've experienced it not just once, but several times. I've experienced the toxicity of a relationship not just once, but several times. I've unearthed why I am accountable and why I am responsible for repeating those same behaviors over and over again. And if I could share with just one person, right, how to not do that, how to heal and become whole before you have the situation where you have 3 different fathers for your children in your life, then I'm sharing it. And if I wrap it and encapsulate it in shame, then I can't give you the fullness of whatever that is. So though I know that there's sin in that, though I know that there is a societal judgment in that, though I know that oftentimes people might think that I'm not qualified to tell them anything because I'm 41 and I've never been married and I don't know what it is to be a wife, etc. All of that can be true to you. But what I do know is that when I was in that first relationship, if I would have had someone who knew my experience and who was qualified to give me the information, I would have paid money for somebody to help me then so that I wouldn't have continued my pattern. I would have given my life savings to not have to put my kids through the experience that they've been through. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here giving you the information. That's not me flipping it to make it a positive, because there are so many things that are happening inside of that I guilt myself for, that I feel a certain way about. But if I live in that bondage of shame, then I'll continue to miss the opportunities to enable someone else to learn something from my journey so that they don't have to walk that same path. And isn't that why we're here? Isn't part of the reason why we're here, if we're not living this self-involved, self-focused life, isn't part of the reason why we're here to pass our light on to other people? Isn't part of the process of parenting to pass your wisdom on to others? Isn't part of the process of just living every single day and learning lessons every single day so that you can give that education and that wisdom and that experience to someone else so that they can learn those lessons without, in fact, having to experience the pain of those situations? Now, if you're anything like me, which I was this way for a very good portion of my life, learning it and intellectualizing it wasn't enough for me. Like, I actually had to experience it. And now I no longer am that way. So if I can share this journey with someone else so that they don't have to experience the pain in order to learn the lesson, then I will gladly share all of the honesty and all of the vulnerability of my moments with you so that that exists, even if it's just one person. And it's not about me. It's about the fact that I know that I know that God has a plan for me. I know that that plan is for me to flourish. I know that his plan is good. And I also know that that plan isn't just about me. That plan is about ensuring that I am sharing with the gifts that he's given me into the world to make sure that you guys are exposed to that same information without actually having to go through it. So let's talk about shame. We're going to get deep into your own shame, and I'm just going to use mine as the example, but we all have something that we have shame around. We all have something that we feel disqualifies us. We all have something that we feel does not make us capable of going into the world and helping anyone else because we're so broken. It's not true, right? Those judgments aren't true, but we have those shames. And so in order to find what your deepest shame is, sometimes it might not be prevalent to you. I know what mine is because I've done the work to figure it out. I know why I changed the name of my platform from Single Plus Two to my name, Carrie Nicole. Like, I know why that happened. I know that it was because the Single Plus Two was me putting it into the world and giving it to you so that you wouldn't judge me for it. And once I figured out that that was happening, I was like, well, but does that define you though? Because it doesn't. So let's call you who you are. And this is your name and this is who you are. And that's only a small portion of your experience. So I changed the name of the platform based on that information as well. Before that though, I didn't really know and have knowledge around or the fact that I was even shaming myself for it in the first place. Like, I knew that I felt guilt around it, but I didn't realize that there was so much shame embodied in it. So how do we find our shame point? The thing that is your greatest defense is a result of your deepest insecurity. So if someone talked about my parenting, I was immediately defensive. Even if they were trying to help me parent my children better, immediately defensive. If someone talked about my relationship, unless of course it was me sharing with them about my relationship, but if someone talked about my relationship in a negative way or made me accountable for the fact that that relationship existed the way that it did, immediately defensive. And so I started to take inventory of the spaces where I was the most defensive. And most of the time, the root of that was you have 3 kids by 3 different people. That disqualifies you. That's something to shame yourself for. That's something you should feel guilt around. And the parenting part was you've put your kids in a situation where they're already behind everyone else because their family system is broken and corrupt, right? It has all of these inner workings that you don't want them to experience when they exist into the world. So how are you going to be a good parent? Well, of course, you're going to get defensive because that's an insecurity. That's a deep insecurity. I can never be a good parent to my kids because of the situation that I've put them in. That's what I told myself. So what's your greatest defense? What's something that you know immediately that you're going to get defensive about? Now, sometimes the thing like parenting, there was another part of that, which is I was a teen mom. So I had that shame around being a teen mom too. But sometimes the defense is this umbrella, and there's all these things that fall underneath of it. So when you're taking this inventory, it's so helpful to write down the times where you get the most defensive and then try to figure out what that broad umbrella is. And whatever that is where your shame point is. You have an insecurity about it because the story that you're telling yourself is the world is judging you for it. So therefore, you're going to judge yourself for it. And therefore, you're going to feel deep-rooted shame around it because it disqualifies you. Some people have it around not having a degree. Even if they're in a prominent position and they're making six figures and they're successful, they know that the rooms that they're stepping in, they don't have a degree and everyone else does. So it disqualifies them, even though it doesn't actually. Some people have shame around an addiction. So they know, well, because I was an addict, I'm disqualified from helping anybody in their journey. Well, I can tell you, the person who has helped me the most in my journey is also an addict and is in recovery from that addiction, but has been the greatest help and wisdom source in my entire life. So he's not disqualified and neither are you. So really take inventory of that. And then think about the fact that when you have a shame, it's really at the root, pride and fear, right? So if you think about shame as the flowering weed at the top, that stem that's leading it to its source is pride. The root of that pride and shame is fear. So what do I mean by that? Well, the shame comes from a space of pride and not like I'm proud of myself, but I'm going to present myself to the world from this ego place, which is me having to divulge and be very open about my being and what I'm good at. So like I need to walk around the world with this mask of perfectionism on. I need to walk around the world being submerged in my self-absorbed mental state. And I'm going to walk around in this state of pride. So if I don't have the degree, I'm going to walk around with this sense of pride around how productive I am. Like, look how good I am at my job because I have this deep-rooted pride because of the shame. If I have that sense of shame around parenting, I'm going to walk around in the world telling myself and everyone else that I'm a really good parent because the shame exists in that thing. It's not wanting to be exposed for the flaws inside of those things because you need to walk around with the mask on to prevent other people from actually seeing into you. So if I have a shame, it's because I've walked around in my life creating a pride for that thing. But all of it is rooted in fear. Fear that people might see us for who we actually are. Fear that we might be exposed and vulnerable and thus hurt by people's emotions and perspectives. Fear that if people have a judgment about us, that therefore that means that their judgment is actual fact and that we are disqualified and that we aren't good enough and that we aren't able to walk into the world in our purpose because of the judgment that others have for us. All of it is rooted in a fear of being seen. A fear that if being seen, we will not be able to be productive or perfect, which is a cycle because it's, I have shame, so I have pride around that thing. I have pride around that thing because of this fear. And because of the fear, my ego comes into play. And it's this whole big cycle. But in reality, it's just limiting your ability to walk in the world in freedom and as your true self. So if people are judging me for having 3 different kids by 3 different people and they're not going to watch my videos, then okay, they're not. These videos weren't for them, and that's okay because someone is going to be for them. It's really the freedom around what's for me is for me based on anything that has happened in my experience and all of the gifts that God has given me. See, we tend to think that our sin disqualifies us, and makes it so that we can't go into the world and do good things. Well, if I've done that, then I can't do this. Well, if I've been that, then I can't be this. But the reality is that is not true. You can make your life anything you want it to be. And if you're free and if your thinking is freeing and in a freed place, you'll say, what's for me is for me. And I'm just going to exist in the present in my freed state of being and know that the plans that are for me are good. Well, how do we do that? The first thing you have to do is give yourself some grace. Y'all, no one in this world is perfect. And just because your sin shows, right? So having 3 kids by 3 different people, you can't hide that. There's no way for me to hide that like that person's porn addiction. There's no way for me to hide that like that person's addiction to a substance. There's no way to hide that like that person's covert narcissism. There's no way to hide that like all of the other sins that exist, right? You're pregnant, everyone sees it. You have a baby, everyone knows it. They see who that child's father is. It's on display. It's like having a billboard for your shame. In fact, I experienced just this very thing. I was supposed to speak at a women's conference. The date was given to me. I was prepped to do it. And then I found out that I was pregnant with my youngest. So I had to go to the host and say, hey, listen, I am glad to still speak. I would love to still be able to share my story. And when this event happens, I'm going to be 8 months pregnant. So everyone's going to see that thing. I'm not going to hide it. And the host of the event asked me to step down. And when she asked me to step down, there was a great showering of shame. But then I thought about it later and I said, aren't the greatest speakers that you've ever heard the ones who stand in the pulpit or stand on the stage and divulge their greatest fears and their greatest shames, and they're human even on that stage? I mean, one of my favorite pastors, Jerry Flowers, he says all the time, I'm just the vessel. This is the message that God gave me, and I have sinned, period. I'm standing up here giving you the message, but I am a sinner just like you. I should be sitting in those same pews as you, but I'm up here giving the message because God told me that I was a vessel. It makes me no different than you. But she asked me to step down, and so I did. Because my shame showed. My sin showed. And hers didn't, and neither did the other speakers. And so there are things that we have shame around that we can hide, and there are things that we have shame around that everyone's going to see. It's like when, you see these corrupted individuals and then something hits the news and you're like, holy cow, look at what this person's done. And now they have this extreme shame around it. Well, when you didn't know when it was behind closed doors, there was no shame that existed. They were still doing the same behaviors. You just didn't know about it. It didn't show. It wasn't on a billboard. But you have to give yourself the same grace that you would give anyone else. If you saw someone who was experiencing having 3 kids by 3 different people, you would give them grace. And if you wouldn't, then there's something in you that's creating that sense of judgment. You have to give yourself grace. You have to say, you know what? I was operating from what was, my experience then, what was my knowledge then, what was my wisdom then. I didn't know why I was picking the same type of people. I didn't know why I was using sexual behavior to be enough and valued and wanted. But I'm going to give myself grace for that and try to walk into my next. The second thing you do is really you have to heal that insecurity. If you don't heal that insecurity, it will show up over and over and over again in your life. Because the insecurity is the root of your defense and is the root of your pride, fear, and shame. So you have to heal that insecurity. You have to tell yourself, okay, you did that in your past, but it was in your past. So what can you learn from this? And how can you heal that insecurity? 2 things. You have to forgive yourself, and you have to stop caring about people's judgment. You have to know that those same people who are judging you from the pews are the same people who, if they stepped on the pulpit and they were exposed, their sin would show too, because everybody falls short. You also have to allow it to be what it is. This happened, it exists, it is that. You have to allow it. I know that I was operating from a very different space when I was going through those phases in my life. But I also know that I wouldn't operate in that same knowledge and wisdom right now, but it still exists. I'm not going to hide it from you. I'm not going to act like it doesn't exist. I'm going to allow it to be. because it is. And my kids are my greatest blessings. No matter who their dads are, no matter what insecurity I was in when I was in those relationships and continuing those type of abusive relationships, they are my greatest blessing. So I'm going to choose to focus on that. I'm going to choose to focus on the lessons that I learned to bring me to this place of wisdom. And then I'm going to identify that it was done in the past. It was something that I did as a result of who I was in the past, and I'm not that person anymore. And I have to understand that. I have to understand that I've learned the lessons that I've learned based on those experiences. And I also, for the very last point of this, have to know that if there is shame around it, that I will never truly be free. So if a man walks into my world tomorrow and he says, I think you're my wife, but you also have 3 kids by 3 different men and I'm going to judge you for that, then I have to be like, well, that's not for me. If somebody says, I want you to speak on my stage, but I can't let you speak there because you have 3 kids by 3 different people, then I have to say, okay, well, that space isn't for me. I don't have to shame myself and say, God's never going to allow me to share my story. God's never going to let me walk into spaces and share my wisdom with people. My entire life has been in vain because I'm experiencing it, but nobody's allowing me to share the wisdom that I've cultivated from those experiences. I'm not going to sit there because I know that my story was for a reason. I know that my experiences were for a reason. And I know, again, that if I could save one person from experiencing the things that I experienced, that I will tell my story 1,000 times and risk judgment from 1,000,000 people just to save that one person from the experience of bondage that I've experienced, just to free that one person from the space that they're judging themselves and condemning themselves and feeling like they're not good enough. So thank you guys for tuning in. I really encourage you to take inventory of your defenses. Really find what those deep-rooted insecurities are and understand that if you have shame and you haven't forgiven yourself and freed yourself from that shame, that everything you do, every walk that you take in life is operating from that core belief that you're not enough because of that shame. And it will not be until you break free from that bondage that you really start to exist in the freedom that says, what's for me is for me, and God's plans for me are good. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate all of you. Please remember that if you're healing from a toxic relationship and you want to emerge in powerful peace, that link is in the show notes underneath. You can work with me and we can help you along the journey. Again, my experience is this journey. I've walked through this journey for myself and I know that it works and I would love to take you there. Also, remember the Peace Podcast comes out every Monday on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also on my website, carrienicole.com. Also, remember to follow me on all social media sites as Carrie Nicole to be able to tune in to my content on a weekly basis. Thank you guys for joining me. Thanks for allowing me to do that freedom podcast. It is a freedom that I feel based on breaking free from that shame. And if you would love to talk to me about how you might break free from your own shame, hit me up on social media, hit me up on my website, and send me an email and let me know. And I would love to work with you one-on-one. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next week, y'all.